126 of the Pew Bibles. Reading from verse 9. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you and you reap its harvest, bring to the priest a sheaf of the first grain you harvest. He is to wave the sheaf before the Lord so that it will be accepted on your behalf. The priest is to wave it on the day after the Sabbath. On the day you wave the sheaf, you must sacrifice as a burnt offering to the Lord a lamb a year old without defect, together with its grain offering of 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made to the Lord by fire, a pleasing aroma, and its drink offering of 1/4 of a hin of wine. You must not eat any bread or roasted or new grain until the very day you bring this offering to your God. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come, wherever you live. From the day after the Sabbath, the day you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, count off 7 full weeks. Count off 50 days up to the day after the 7th Sabbath, and then present an offering of new grain to the Lord. From wherever you live, bring 2 loaves made of 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour, baked with yeast, as a wave offering of first fruits to the Lord. Present with this bread 7 male lambs, each a year old and without defect, 1 young bull and 2 rams. They will be a burnt offering to the Lord, together with their grain offerings and drink offerings, an offering made by fire, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. Then sacrifice 1 male goat for a sin offering, and 2 lambs, each a year old, for a fellowship offering. The priest is to wave the 2 lambs before the Lord as a wave offering, together with the bread of the first fruits. They are a sacred offering to the Lord for the priest. On that same day you are to proclaim a sacred assembly and do no regular work. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come, wherever you live. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God."
Second reading is Matthew 13, verses 24 to 30 and 36 to 43. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seeds in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed ears, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seeds in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may not root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burnt. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." He answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the Son of the kingdom. The weeds are the son of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burnt in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the fiery furnace, where they will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear.
Many of you will have that delightful experience of when children reach the stage of learning the word why. Put your toys away. Why? Because it's tea time. Why? Because we always have tea at this time. Why? And sooner or later, the normal adult finds themselves thinking, why am I arguing with a 3.5-year-old about this? And resorts to the age-old reply of the powerful, because I say so. Why do we have a harvest thanksgiving? You know, it's a form of service which must have the longest history, because for certainly well over 4,000 years, people have been having harvest thanksgiving services. Why? There are only 3 times in the Old Testament when the people of Israel all had to gather together. One was Passover, and that was remembering God's salvation, which had made them into the nation they were. But the other 2, Pentecost and the Feast of Tabernacles, were in fact harvest thanksgiving services for the beginning of the harvest and its fulfillment. So why? And when you start to look at it, you see there is in the Bible's telling of harvest thanksgivings, such as the reading from Leviticus we had, a sort of logic to why it should be. Being thankful, as I was hinting to the children, being thankful isn't something that always comes that easily to us. For many of us, our default position in conversations, well, really, is grumbling, isn't it? You meet someone, how are you? Oh, okay, I suppose. And then the stories start, and we listen to people's complaints. We forget the old hymn, count your blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. So at a very simple level, having thanksgiving built into the year and making sure that at least at one point during the year we pause to thank God for the fruit of the fields, for the produce which sustains us. That's good. It stops that spirit of grumbling ending up dominating everything. But it does a bit more. It prevents our sense of self-satisfaction. In Deuteronomy, in chapter 8, there is a warning given to the people that when they enjoy prosperity, they won't think that it's entirely by their own effort that they have it. Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 10, when you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws and his decrees that I am giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. And Jesus told the story of the rich fool, the man who, in that delightful phrase, pulled down his barns in order to build bigger barns, and who enjoyed his prosperity and leaned back and said, "Soul, you have done so well." Just rejoiced at all he'd got. And those awful words, "Fool, tonight your soul will be required of you." And so the first reason is that if we build thanksgiving into our routines of life, to thank God when we sit down to a meal, to thank God as we gather on a Sunday, once a year to thank God specifically for the good things that we have from creation, it protects us from grumbling and self-satisfaction. But we can go a step further than that and say that a second reason we have a harvest family is to remind us that our thanksgiving should be directed to God. There is a general acceptance that to be thankful, to show gratitude, is a good thing. We don't like those who just snatch and grab and have for themselves without ever thinking to pause and say thank you. I nearly said wife. That would have been terrible. Then I mentally thought woman, and then I thought, no, that's even worse. Every person who stands and makes a meal knows the frustration of the people who throw the meal down and then who leave the table and the debris behind without saying a word of thanks. Those who give know what it is to be frustrated by those who take but never say thanks. And the Bible teaches us again and again to remember that the one who gives us is our Father in heaven. It is not the farm that gives us food. It is not the meteorologist who provides the rain. It is not the person who prints the diaries who makes sure that the calendar maintains its cycle. These are all the good gifts of God. And so it's good for us to come and to thank God. We didn't achieve these things. He gave us things. We were just stewards in the whole process. And again, you find in the Psalms this sense of indebtedness to God for all the good things he has. So the harvest teaches us thankfulness, and the harvest teaches us thankfulness directed to God. Thirdly, harvest teaches us to give our thankfulness to God with compassionate hearts. It's very interesting to read the account of the harvest thanksgivings, like, for example, the account we read in Leviticus, and to then discover this little bit at the end of it. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among them. I am the Lord your God. The last stage of their lives, my parents lived in a very rich agricultural land in the Midlands of England. And there, the industrialization of farming was making its impact. Fields were not small. Fields were vast, vast fields where many old fields had been joined together. And the reason was the machinery that was used to reap the corn harvest was huge machinery. It'd be no exaggeration to say that you could barely get one of the combine harvesters in a building this big. And because of that, they weren't very good at turning corners. They had to take quite a big sweep. And so the maximum number of corners you could have in a field was 4. And if you had 10 fields, each with 4, that was 40 corners, which the machinery would miss. So you got rid of all those corners by having one big field. And that undoubtedly influenced the price that we pay for a loaf of bread. So let's not be simplistic and just blame the farmers for maximizing his yield. But when they set about reaping the harvest in the Old Testament, they didn't go right into the corners. They left what was standing there in the corners. And if things had fallen from the trees, they didn't pick them up. And if they realized they'd missed something, they left it there. And this was so that the stranger or the impoverished from their own community could go into the field after the harvest, and there would be plenty for them. That's what the book of Ruth begins with, that story of Ruth as an alien in a foreign place, taking the free food that was left for those. The Old Testament celebration of the harvest taught not only to be thankful, and to be thankful to God as the giver of every good and perfect gift, but to be thankful with a compassionate heart. We sang that lovely song of Graham Kendrick's, which is a prayer that we might have hearts that are open and are willing to be generous, to give comfort, to recognize that being entrusted with the stewardship of the earth means that we have a responsibility to the poor and to the outsider and those who hate the outsider and want him to go to his own home, who feel that the poor should just snap out of it, just haven't got the spirit that the Old Testament teaches. Don't reap to the very edge of your field. Don't go twice over your olive trees or your grapevines. If you forget something when you're carrying out the harvest, leave it where it is. Because the time of harvest is a time when we should have compassion for others renewed in our hearts. But back comes our toddler. And our toddler says, why? And your reaction is say, well, we've given you 3 reasons. We've given you that we should have an attitude of thankfulness. We should have an attitude of thankfulness to God. We should have an attitude of thankfulness to God with compassion for others. That's 3 reasons. But the toddler will ask again, why? And the answer that the Old Testament gives again and again and again as to why we should behave in a certain way is simply this: I am the Lord your God. That's the answer to the question of why. I am the Lord your God. The God who was and who is and who always will be. The God who has called us to faith in him. the God who has shown his saving love in the Passover, and then in the gift of Jesus Christ, his Son. All around the Israelites in the days Leviticus was written were other peoples who worshipped other pagan deities, who carried out fertility rites, who sought to maximize what they could get out of the land. People who lived in fear of the gods of wind and rain and sun and drought. And what did those who knew the living God have to do? They had to bring the very best of their harvest, their first fruits, and offer them to God. And they had to leave behind what they'd left behind for others. The reason why? They were God's. I am the Lord your God. You are my people. We come to harvest. We do this slightly strange, slightly antique looking service. And the toddler, probably a 37-year-old toddler, says, "Why?" And the answer is, I'm grateful. I'm grateful to God. I want to be compassionate the way he's been compassionate to me. But above all, I am his, and he is mine. And I want to show this in something as ordinary as eating a slice of bread or drinking a cup of juice. Amen. We sing our closing